Hello to one and all, and welcome to the webinar on demystifying the Indian tendering landscape for foreign companies. I'm Rupal Sheth, Senior Manager, Markets and Business Development at SAS Partners Corporate Advisors, and I'll be your host this afternoon. I hope I'm audible to all the attendees who have joined us here today. In case of any inconvenience of not being able to hear us, there is a reaction button which has a smiley face on it on the icon. Please do leave us a thumbs up or a hand raise, or you could leave us a message on the Q&A chat box. So to start with, to begin, let me briefly introduce SAS Partners Corporate Advisors. We are a market entry advisory firm with a versatile team of experts in finance, taxation, legal, manufacturing, engineering, and business, supported by senior technical talents from various industries. Our core expertise lies in assisting foreign companies looking to establish themselves in India through sales offices, wholly owned subsidiaries, joint ventures, or corporate acquisitions. With over 16 years in the industry, SAS Partners has a strong market presence and has acted as a trusted advisor for many foreign companies in capitalizing the opportunities in the Indian market. So SAS Partners is headquartered in Chennai with a branch in Bangalore and representatives in Hyderabad, Delhi, and Nantes, France. As a professional service firm, we take pride in organizing the thought leadership programs addressing opportunities or challenges for foreign companies in India, and today's webinar is not different. Navigating the enormous opportunities India provides through a tendering process at times could be a daunting task or could be a prohibitive initiative for foreign businesses. Today's webinar is our humble attempt to create a platform for sharing our experience and knowledge in this regard. I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Balaji, Senior Vice President and a Local Division Manager, Energy Industries, ABB India. With nearly 28 years of extensive expertise in the oil and gas, chemicals, and energy sectors, Mr. Balaji leads digital transformative initiatives, collaborating closely with customers to co-innovate and co-create solutions at ABB. Mr. Balaji, I now invite you to introduce and share a few insights about our topic for today.
Yeah, thanks, Rupal, for this introduction and having me on this webinar today. And I guess from what I've heard, we are trying to explain the tendering landscape for possible companies that are interested in working in India. So, before we get into the detailed presentation, which will be hosted by SAS Partners, Mr. Pillai and Mrs. Chandana, I thought I'd just give a brief heads up about the importance of this topic. For those of you who are new to India, or this could be an information, but for those of you who are already working in India, you might know that broadly we can divide the customer base in two types of customers. What we call as the public sector undertakings and then the private sector undertaking. The public sector undertaking are those companies where the government has a stake or it's a state equity, and then the private owned companies are those companies which are completely owned by private entities or equity players. So the major differentiation here is while both of them go through a certain tendering process, the tendering process could be quite stringent for public sector undertaking, mainly because of the reason that these bids are typically no deviation bid, meaning a tender is called for and then you make a bid. The bid cannot contain deviations. If there's a deviation, you'll be called for withdrawal of the deviation. There are very rare cases where a deviation would be accepted after the tender is submitted. So this brings to this important stage on the due diligence that needs to be followed while preparing for a bid and submitting a bid. From a business side, possibly I would move a little back before the tender is issued, because if you're able to engage with those customers in positioning the product, in positioning the technical specification, and not just limiting your discussions to technicalities, possibly talking about the commercial terms and conditions and the legal requirements that you might have, which otherwise might be a no-go. I think this is a very great platform to engage And I can share from my experience that typically the customers are quite open for discussion. So having built on pre-bid engagement, the next important stage is how you handle the tender in terms of diligence in reading the technical specification, the scope of work, and more importantly, while the Indian landscape has been quite improved in terms of commercial tax, where we have been brought under a GST rule, still I would say that there are areas of where an expert guidance would be definitely required, either in-house or external, depending upon the choice that you might have. It is important to have them understood and then take it up. While I've said that for public sector undertakings, it's quite rare that a deviation is accepted. It's of course a different scenario when you work with a private sector company. The private sector company does allow an opportunity for negotiation and discussion in terms of asking for clarifications or asking for deviations. So it opens up. But however, to do that, you need to be very clear about what the tender is written, the intent, and the meaning in terms of an Indian law. I don't want to discourage or put up a sheet that is very complicated. It might appear as a maze, but I would still say that in terms of ease of work, ease of contract management, a lot of things are more in India. But just to be aware about where we are putting our hands into, I think understanding the composition of the tender from the various contexts in terms of the technical requirements, in terms of commercial requirements, and in terms of legal, what protection the contract might offer, or where you need to take a safeguard action. I think it's an extremely important stage, whether it is a public sector or a private sector. I think we have experts in terms of Mr. Pillai and Mrs. Chandana to explain. Over to you, Mr. Pillai, and thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Balaji. That was really nice of you to set the stage for our discussion this afternoon. Now that we have an overview of the topic, let me introduce our subject speakers and their backgrounds. Before I introduce our subject speakers of the day, please note there will be an opportunity for Q&A towards the end of the session. Meanwhile, if you have any questions during the session, please feel free to leave a note in the Q&A box. You will find the Q&A icon on your toolbar for the same. Our subject expert, Mr. R.C. Pillai, an industry veteran with extensive experience in procurement and tender management. Mr. Pillai's expertise includes GST implementation, tax planning, strategy, and risk management. He has served as a tax director and head of taxation at Lenovo Group and held significant positions at ABB, Crompton Greaves, and McNally Bharat Engineering. Our next expert, Ms. Chandana, a distinguished professional with deep expertise in tendering and foreign direct investment regulations for firms entering the Indian market. Ms. Chandana specializes in incorporation support, operational legal counsel, policy setting, and negotiating complex contracts for both startups and established companies. She has previously served as an assistant vice president of legal and integrity at ABB and senior legal associate at Krishnamurthy & Co. Interesting note, both Mr. Pillai and Ms. Chandana are now active advisors in taxation, commercial, and legal at SAS Partners based in Bangalore. Now, I would like to hand over the screen to our subject experts for an insightful session. Hope all of you have an enjoying session.
Thank you, Rupal. Thank you so much for the introduction. And thank you, Mr. Balaji, for joining us amidst his busy schedule at this time of the day. And our welcome to all the joinees and attendees of this.
Yeah, good afternoon to everyone.
Yeah. So to set a context, before we move on to the slides, I would like to just set a bit of a context, like what Rupal mentioned, to further build upon why we are going about, starting thought leadership into this particular segment of the tendering landscape of India. So we constantly work with SAS partners, with multiple foreign companies doing the India entry process. And a lot of times, one of the constant queries we get or the concerns that we hear is regarding the Indian tendering, participation for the Indian tendering, right? From outside, for people who are not familiar with the landscape, it might seem a little complex, which is why we thought of going through this process and sort of, creating a series of webinars and interactive sessions where we can sort of demystify the Indian tendering landscape altogether. And this is what we hope the first in a series of seminars that we can hold to focus on the Indian tendering system. So the focus of today's topic would be to give everyone an overview of what Indian tendering system would be, how to go about it, what are the processes involved, what are the key stages of the Indian tendering system, the documentations. We have Mr. Pillai here with us with decades of experience in handling and possibly coming across almost all kinds of challenges that you could foresee during a tendering this thing. So we will, I understand it's 2:30 in the afternoon. The topic can be a little dry. You have a tax and a legal expert sitting and talking to you. We promise not to make this into a too, boring and PPT heavy presentation. We will try and keep it as
more engaged.
Yeah, as engaging as possible. And we will try and share as much insights that during our respective careers that we have come across. And try and make it as simpler in terms as possible without, making it too drab and dreary, I hope. So with that, I think we can start with the presentation. So we start off with looking at the overview of the Indian tendering landscape. And I believe Mr. Balaji already mentioned the two larger areas where you would find the tenders coming in, which is the public tenders and the private tenders. Key thing, the public tenders are regulated. There is a legal framework within which the public tenders have to operate. And then the private tenders that come in. The public tenders usually come for, all kinds of requirements, from regular routine purchases that the government departments have to do to larger contracts. So private tenders, depending on the requirements, they are very specific, limited requirements. They have clear clarity on what is the requirement there. So you would find tender opportunities in both these segments. And public tenders, again, the impression is when you deal with public tenders, you're going to deal with departments. But typically, although these are government tenders, there are entities, or what we call as PSUs, right?
Central public sector undertaking, then government departments, then railways, defense, quasi-government bodies, then educational institutions. These are all falling under the public tendering categories.
Yeah. Although it is a government tender, when you're dealing with public corporations, you would find that it is as structured as if you're dealing with a private company, because you would have the same organizational structure with an MD and a CEO and a clearly regulated process. So it would not be as much of a hassle, as the red tape issues would be much lesser in the public tenders, because there are entities involved in this, although these entities are governed by departments.
So the huge potential is involved in the public tendering system. Say 1/5 of the total GDP of $3.7 trillion of 2023 is covered under this type of tendering process. Means around $740 billion business comes out of public tendering system. So it is nobody can afford to lose it. So only thing we have to see how we have to work within the regulated system, because after all, they are drawing the funds from the Consolidated Fund of India. So they are bound to follow certain rules, regulations. And as far as the CPSUs, that central public sector undertakings, are concerned, there, as Chandana said, there it runs really like a typical professional business, commercial entity. So there you will find more liberal in approach. So government tenders will be a little bit conservative approach. The rules, regulations, and file movements will be a little bit slow. But we cannot afford to not to participate in the tender because of the significant volume or market.
Yeah. So now, how do you find how tenders come up? Typically, you would have portals. All the government tenders, most of the government tenders, there are 2-3 venues where you would find the tenders. One, the key of them being the government e-marketplace, or the GEM portal, as you call it. So you would find all active upcoming tenders in the GEM portal. There are other, non-governmental sites where you can find tenders across the globe, across India, wherever there has been a tender floated. So some of the sites I come across usually are Tender 24/7 or Tata Nexark. So there are avenues now where tenders that are open in India that are going live can be identified and found. And there are multiple bases on which these tenders are floated. One is the open tenders where anybody can participate. These are open to all participants. Qualified bidders, anybody who's a qualified bidder can bid in these tenders. The next category is the limited tender, where the bids would be sent out to selective number of bidders, participants, and the invites will reach only them and only they can participate. There are single item tenders, which are not very frequent, but still not extremely unusual, which depend on the requirement. It is usually for a very niche product, or in case of an emergency, or there has to be a particular system that has to be maintained in a particular manner, and then it can be sent out to only this thing. So you will find multiple types of tenders that you can find in India. With private tenders, the additional chance would be, it would usually be a limited tender rather than an open tender with private entities. But the good thing is you will have an option, as Mr. Balaji said, to negotiate, to take deviations and all that. The other aspect of how you can find what type of tenders are scope-based. So depending on what kind of procurement is being made. Sometimes it is for small items, but large bulk purchases where they would be looking for a rate contract or an item rate contract. Sometimes it would be for large scale turnkey projects, like 10 bids invited from EPC contractors.
Yeah, who takes responsibility of from concept to commissioning, and then cost plus contracts, these type of tenders?
These are the type of tenders that you would find. So there is a wide variety of requirements and scope for participations that you would find in India. The regulatory framework for the tenders primarily, as Mr. Balaji also indicated, is like when it comes to private tenders, the public procurement law regulation is limited. They have a bit more of freedom, but private tenders, there are multiple rules that govern the public procurement, starting with the General Financial Rules of 2017, which clearly provide. So even though these are government procurements, right, there are very clear requirements under the GFRs on how to procure, the process of procurement, the requirement to have a transparency in the bidding process, the bidding evaluation process, as well as, even the quantities that a bid can be invited for. So these are all governed. So there is a set framework currently already as under the GFR. We also have something called the Public Procurement Act, which is currently in the form of a bill, which would bring more uniformity across India in terms of the procurement norms, which are more aligned to international purchase practices. So that is one of the public procurement system. In addition to this, depending on when we are talking about public tenders, depending on the departments, you would find department-specific procurement guidelines, which they will have to adhere to. So the procurement process is clearly detailed. These are publicly available documents, so that transparency is, of course, there. Apart from that, be it a public or private tender, once at the end of the day, we are all working towards signing a contract with an entity. So the Indian Contract Act would apply. The India being a common law country, Indian Contract Act is based currently on the English Contract Act. So it is a law established in 1872, which has been working very efficiently for all these years. So the Indian Contract Act would govern the contractual aspects of the tender, where foreign entities are involved with respect to the the entry into this, as well as the payment related transactions. We also have the foreign exchange management laws. To a certain extent, we will also have the foreign investment policies coming in, where where requirements of collaboration have to come in. So there are certain sectoral guidelines by as part of the foreign policy that we will have to look at. These are the regulatory framework with respect to how to enable a proper functioning of a tender. We also have a legal system in the form of the Competition Act, which ensures that there are no malpractices during tender.
No cartel.
Precisely. So no bid rigging, no cartels, those kind of anti-competitive practices. To have them regulated, we have the Competition Act. So that sort of closes the loop with respect to the legal and regulatory framework. Of course, there are multiple specifics involved in this, but from a larger perspective, these are the primary areas of law that we try to look at. So that forms the basis of our Indian tendering landscape. And then that is how we move on to the, the tender life cycle. So it is on the basis of all these that we move on to the tender life cycle. For those of you who are familiar with the tendering life cycle, this life cycle might be quite familiar with you. Pillai sir, I don't think there is any significant difference in India from a tender life cycle that you would see in other jurisdictions, right?
Oh, there is no significant.
No significant difference there. So it all starts with something called a tender invite. So we will go through the terminologies when we take up the tender documentation on the differences of how the tenders get invited. But the life cycle starts with the tender invite. And once you receive a tender invite, you would be able to download the documents, because currently most of the tender documents are through any of the procurement portals which are online. I feel there might be very less, if any, where you have to actually go and get physical documents.
Nowadays, it is not, almost nil.
Almost nil. So these are all easily accessible documents where you can purchase or download the tender documents. Once you get the documents, the first stage of a life cycle, when we look at it from a bidder's perspective, would be the bid qualification. As a foreign entity, the first question would be, do you qualify for a bid? What are the type of qualifications? And not just technical qualifications. Technical qualification is one. The other is sometimes there are financial qualification requirements, specific turnover requirements that we need to check about. Certain requirements where you are needed to have a presence here, or you are required to join together.
In the form of joint venture or consortium?
Or a consortium. A joint venture or a consortium. And then go forward and bid together with an Indian entity, which could have an immense advantage. We will explain that when we are talking about the valuation criteria, that a joint venture or a consortium, irrespective of whether it's a tender requirement, could be an advantage for a foreign entity trying to participate in an Indian tender. So these are some of the, bid qualification criteria. Once we ascertain the bid qualification criteria and you ascertain that you have qualified, is when we move on to the next stages. We will go through the detailed stages of bidding. Just to give an overview, the next stage would be a pre-bid meeting, where the clarifications would be provided for pre-bids.
It's the right time to get all your queries addressed or clarified.
Absolutely. So the pre-bid meeting gives you a forum or a platform to meet the customer directly before the bid submission. We can get any clarifications done, any requests for deviations that we can clarify there. So the pre-bid meetings is a very crucial stage in a tendering process. Then the bidder will have to go through the entire exercise of a bid preparation, which is followed by the next formal stage, which would be the bid submission. So you submit a bid, if it is through a GEM portal or an online portal, the bid submission is permitted right through the portal. And sometimes you even have an option for something called a reverse auction. So while the normal bidding process is you submitting a competitive price bid and then sort of closing it out, a reverse auction, contrary to the normal auction where they are trying to get the highest price, a reverse auction is the exact opposite. So there would be an open window that is recommended in the GEM portal. The reverse auction is an optional thing. If you choose for a reverse auction, you can choose the time. There would be a time and a time period, a slot indicated for reverse auction, where during the reverse auction period, the bidders can try and match the price. And at the end of the auction period, whoever has the lowest bid would be considered as the lowest bidder. So that is generally the bid submission process that goes through. And then we have the technical and financial evaluation. We do have a bit of a slide on the technical and financial evaluation, right?
Last is award of the contract, which will have, of course, it's awarded to the lowest bidder. Just in a lighter vein, in the contract, any contracting organization, people used to say that unless otherwise you make mistakes, you'll not be able to become L1. Means
right.
This is just in a lighter vein. Of course, we have to see that no mistakes are made.
Yeah. So see, the process may seem complex because there are a lot of documentations involved. But over our experience, what we have found is once you have participated in this bidding process once or twice, then the process remains pretty much the same with a little bit of guidance and support. Right, this is a process that you can definitely participate in any foreign entity, subject to, of course, the qualification criteria, etc. It is not a difficult process to go through. So that much is the bid life cycle, which brings us to the topic of the key tender documentation. So obviously, we have only indicated the major documents here. There would be a lot of additional documents depending on the nature of the bid. You would still find documents that are not indicated here, a lot of other miscellaneous documentation. But it all starts with the invitation to bid. The invitation to bid comes in different forms. The only reason we are saying this is because you will find it in different names. They will call it NIT.
Notice inviting tender, request for price, request for quotes. Any other?
You would find call for bids, invitation to bid, that is an ITB, a CFB, a request for proposal, right? So you would find it in multiple names. NIT, ITB, call for bid, etc. typically have the same connotation. There might be in certain cases when you receive a RFP or a RFQ, depending on the requirement, you might find a slightly different connotation to that. When you get an RFQ, the customer has their requirement already solidified. They have finalized their requirement. They are looking for the best quote. RFP sometimes is when the customer has a requirement, but it's more of an idea. They have not conceptualized the requirement completely, where we might be, as a bidder, required to go with a proposal on how to go about executing the requirement. So that is a small difference that you would find when you see the document coming as an RFP or an RFQ. Upfront, you can have an indication that how much of a scope is involved there. RFP involves a little bit more of a scope. The next is a technical specification document, which will explain what are the specific products or services that are being sought to be procured by the company. And these typically, whatever be the name, would be similar for a public procurement or a private entity. Public procurement, you would find pretty much the standard terminologies used everywhere. So once you're familiar with these terminologies, it should not, there should not be any surprise documentation names that come up your way there. So when you see the technical specifications, and this is something that requires the bidder's time, because unless and until you have an external technical consultant, the technical specifications have to be done in-house, checked whether those are the specifications, your products and services meet the specifications. Once you have the technical specifications looked at, then comes the conditions of contract. So generally, be it a public tender or a private tender, typically you would find a particular way. And I'm sure most of you who have dealt with contracts would have come across this. Usually is that you would see something called the general conditions of contract, and then something called a special conditions of contract. So general conditions of contract would be the more elaborate document that would contain your entire terms of contracting, starting from your scope to all the legal terms, price, payment terms, warranties, defect liabilities, what else, termination provisions, all those, liquidated damages, delay provisions, penalties, all these would come under the general conditions of contract. So typically what PSUs or most of the organizations, what they do is they will have a standard set of conditions called the general condition,
GCC, it is made for the organization as a whole.
Yes.
For the total procurement, and special condition is for the specific projects,
right,
which will override the general conditions.
General conditions. So you will find the standard GCC. Once you're familiar with GCC of a particular public PSU, every time you would pretty much find the same GCC. There would not be any change in the GCC. But depending on the offering, product offering, the SCC, definitely there would be changes. So between these two, if there is a contradiction, the special conditions will always override over the general conditions. From a legal perspective, our recommendation always would be, once you get your conditions of contract, get the same reviewed at the earliest. With the even though there may not be any provision for deviations, or we have limited scope for taking a deviation or changes in the conditions of contract in the public procurement, a review will allow you to take informed risks. Same, it has to be always read with the special conditions. So every time you review it, make sure that you double check and review the documentation, because we have come across n number of instances where the focus was on technical specification and the prices, and the general conditions of contract sort of get ignored. It could have huge implications. Simplest of example, there is this clause that you find in contracts called a force majeure clause. A force majeure clause, a lot of you may be familiar with, right? A force majeure typically means an act of God, which gives you protection against if there is an unforeseeable circumstance. The point is, the clause, if it is absent, it is a bigger worry. If the clause is present and you ignore it, and if it's not worded appropriately, it could backfire a lot, because we have seen contracts where the simplest of the examples, a client had a force majeure clause which was very limited to some fire and terrorist activity and all that. And once there was a large volcanic eruption in Iceland, and the volcanic ash unusually remained spread across the European side, remained in the air for a very long time. The flights were delayed throughout. There were a lot of flight cancellations. Customers in India had a problem, because wherever there were committed deliveries, which had a air delivery, had gotten delayed. And if the force majeure clause was not appropriate, technically you have an alternate method of shipment, right? You could do a sea shipment, but that's not going to give you a timely delivery. So what you are ending up with is a delay penalty or liquidated damages. Simpler matters like this. So it is important to go through the conditions of contract. It's important to know to what extent the liability comes in, because unlike a lot of European jurisdictions where a lot of things are regulated under law, your law is very clear on the conditions of contract. Under Indian law, certain matters have to be agreed upon in the contract. Specifically in the contract. Certain matters will not be addressed by law. The major issues like a breach of contract and all that would be addressed by law. Even force majeure to a certain extent would be addressed by law, but not all of those. Like that, certain issues you have to have addressed in the contract. So we need to check that depending on your risk profile, whether the contract sufficiently protects you. I will not go too much into the legal aspects of the general conditions right now, because that by itself is a 2 or 3 hour ocean by itself. The next key set of documents you would find is bidding formats. Pillai sir, please tell the
bidding format
importance
is the
of
one which we need to very strictly follow. Any change in the format, if we are selecting our own format, unfortunately, it may lead to the disqualification as well or rejection of the bid itself. Such is the importance of strict adherence to the bidding formats.
The formats will be provided as part of the bidding
document.
The importance is attention to detail
Yes.
and making sure that the formats are followed very strictly.
Yes.
Because this is a public procurement process, any change in, any deviation from the bidding format, if at all that bid is accepted, if it is challenged, it becomes a huge concern for the
It
organization.
will delay the total process.
Yeah.
Even if you have become L1, unfortunately, if somebody has taken to the court for violating any rules, then unfortunately it will be cancelled, and then again they will go for rebidding.
Yeah, so we have to go through the entire
cycle
e-tendering process. So bidding formats become very important.
Then comes to bank guarantees.
Yes.
What bank guarantees you have to give during at the time of submission, like EMD, earnest money deposit, to ensure that you are serious about the project or the tender. Then advance BG, performance BG. Advance BG is basically given whenever you need advance. If the contract or conditions provide for paying the advance, you need to give the corresponding bank BGs. And BGs, if it is coming from foreign companies, maybe even there are certain PSUs, public sector undertakings, which accepts BG only from domestic bankers.
Yes.
Suppose if a Daesh bank from Germany gives the BG, then the customer, say ONGC or anybody, they may not accept it directly. They may require it to be endorsed by the local banker, maybe State Bank of India or something like that. Those things, nitty-gritties we have to see. And then this performance bank guarantee.
There are corporate guarantees that come
guarantees
in.
also coming in. And if the project or supplies involves high tech in nature, the customers will require parent company guarantee as well, because based on that technical strength only the contract shall be awarded to you. So in order to make sure that they get the correct set of technical product, they ensure they make it specific that your parent company also gives a guarantee for the faithful performance of the contract.
So these are the primary documentations that we would come across during a bidding process. See, the corporate guarantee and the parent company guarantee are documents issued by the entities themselves. The bank guarantees are issued by the banks, so the chances and the courts will not interfere much into the bank guarantees. So if they encash the bank guarantee, it will be honored by the banks in India. Once the tender documents are reviewed, that brings us to the primary part of a bidding process, which is the bid preparation and submission. So we have sort of put across some of the best practices that we have found in our experience to be immensely effective in reducing the challenges that you face during a bidding process, to give more effective bids and to have more successful outcomes actually through these processes. Pleasure.
Yes. See, this, as you said, the moment you get the bid, it is very essential to quickly set up the cross-functional team involving the technical, legal, commercial, tax, and financial team. Especially if the bid is being submitted from outside India, it is earnestly requested or it is submitted that you engage a local person, local support, so that they go through all the required papers so that it will be of more useful to you in the proper submission of the tender. Next is to prepare for the pre-bid, get the tender documents reviewed at the earliest. Of course, there are certain things just in pre-bid meetings. So prepare a questionnaire jointly by the technical. Of course, technical questionnaire will be there, then commercial questionnaire, legal questionnaire. Please prepare all these questionnaires. Go prepared for the pre-bid meeting. That is the point where all your queries shall be addressed. Means it need not be addressed. They will be either clarified, addressed, or they will say nothing doing. Whatever the clause we have said, there is no change, it will remain same. No change shall be permitted. That is the way they make it. So unless otherwise that is clearly understood and addressed, it will be a very big challenge. Also ensure that during the pre-bid, the deliverables by the tenderer, that is the prospective customers, are also clearly stipulated. And for example, that is making the front available readiness of the civil structures, a permission for the equipment direction, etc., for the cross-country pipeline. And suppose if whether the land has been acquired already, sometime what happens is land is, the government must have bought or paid the money to the landowners, but they may not have taken the physical possession of the land. What happens? The farmers, informally, they would have agreed with the farmers that once the standing crops are harvested, then we will hand over the land. Like that, they will tell, and by the time you get the land physically, then it may be too late, and in that process, you may be losing 3-4 months. That is a very big challenge.
Even pathways may not be there, right? Sometimes, yes. See, we are talking about where you have to execute, because it is public procurement, yes. You would find sites in remote areas, yes. In India, yes. Where you have to deliver your products. It is important to ensure that you have access ways.
Yes,
there.
It is, right. At this stage, it is very well advisable, or it is rather suggested to even engage with the prospective competitors, jointly take up common questions in that platform. Because suppose, for example, if the five prospective bidders are there, if only one voice is raised, then they may ignore that. If all the five put up common question, of course, no need to share any secrecy. That is the way you have to take up the common issues, which everyone is expected to know for the effective pricing.
That is one of the things we have found effective, especially no deviation tenders, because there is no way we will be able to take a deviation to the requirements once the bid submission is done, because the condition for tendering is by itself is such that you cannot take a deviation. So one of the effective ways we have found is where there are common questions. If all the participants, all the bidders have the same requests, yes. Then there would be a compulsion for them to, then they would issue something called a corrigendums to the bid documents where the requirements may be sort of modified, yes. That would suit all the bid participants. So please review your tender documents at the earliest to prepare for the bid meetings, which is why, as Pillai said, reviewing the documents as a first opportunity. Once you receive, download your bid invite, put up your team across the segments, have your technical team ready, have your finance team ready, have your legal team ready, whoever is your advisory, in-house, as Mr. Balaji said, in-house or outside consulting, but please have the things in place.
Yeah, another thing is wherever required, depending upon the type of technicalities of the project or tenders, what you intend to participate, it is strongly recommended that the technical team, which is well versed with that area, if not well versed, at least in association with the local team, it is essential to visit the project site or location where the project or supplies are going to be supplied or commissioned. Just I have one small live experience. For example, we have doing a 400 kV substation in a city near Kanpur in Uttar Pradesh, northern part of India. The project was our scope was to do the complete civil works, erection, testing, commissioning of the total 400 kV substation with 6-7 bays. It's a power evacuation substation, and the supply of transformer alone was in the scope of customer, that is UP Power Corporation. They were to supply 315 MVA transformer. The transformer has reached with great difficulty. Suddenly it reached rather. We had to take about 15 to 20. The unloading, transportation, erection, testing, commissioning was in our scope. That when the transformer reached, we were caught napping. In fact, sorry to say that. Then we ran around somewhere. We caught hold of the crane and then downloaded. Then how to transport? It's hardly 3 kilometers from the railway sidings to the site where it is to be erected. Unfortunately, it is about hundreds of tons. That was the weight of the transformer. And when we saw the road, there was how to take it, there was no road at all. Then wherever road was there, that culverts cannot withstand the weight of these hundreds of tons of transformers. In this process, we had lost almost 4-5 months in taking the transformer physically to the location where it is supposed to be erected. And in the process, railways levied LD, wharfage and demurrage. Then ultimately project got into delays and then got into liquidated damages like this. Same experience was with the Power Grid Corporation, where the transformer again, where the road was not there. Road was, to kindly note, road was to be physically laid for the purpose of taking the transformer 2-3 kilometers of road, which was not at all envisaged. If it is so, these are all the things which is very much required for someone to physically verify the site, depending upon the technicalities or requirements or the deliverables that are expected from the tenderer.
Right.
Sorry, from the bidder.
Right. Also, if I may add one more thing, when you're attending the pre-bid meeting, make sure you have the right team attending.
Yes.
It is important, based on the risks that we have identified during the document review, involve the right members as may be permitted by the entity calling for the tender. If they permit more than one person to attend, if you can bring a team, make sure that you have the right people attending, because a lot of things can be clarified then and there and explained then and there, which would have a lot of impact in the customer accepting the changes that we have asked for, or even us understanding what the requirements are.
Yes.
So
it is true that during the pre-bid, certain conditions may not be relaxed. Customer will not be agreeing to be it. Then can you please take the informed decision? Yes, we have to provide for it. Based on that, accordingly, cross-functional team has to be worked, and they have to work in a well-coordinated and coherent manner. And for example, engineering team has to give you proper BOQ. Tax guys have to give you proper tax loading. Finance guy has to give a proper interest or notional interest cost. So it has to be taken from the team, which experienced team. All these inputs have to be taken. And if it is not taken from the experienced team, and if everyone wants to play safe, let me be very safe. Let me give you a very high BOQ. If engineering team says like that, if tax guy says he will load all the tax, and finance guy says load this much percentage of interest, and unfortunately we'll land up in high H1 bidder, highest bidder.
If I may add on to that as well, while most of the public tenders are no deviation, there is another category of public tenders where they will allow you to take deviations.
Yes.
But for every deviation that you take, there would be a price loading to the price that you quote. For every deviation, there will be a price loading. So like what Mr. Pillai said, if we have already a price quoted, which is a highly loaded price, plus we need to take deviations, then we are literally slashing our possibility of being anywhere near an L1. So it is, once the pre-bid meeting is over, it is important to evaluate the risks based on the pre-bid meetings, and if at all there is any addendums or corrigendums released by the customer. And then we take, risk avoidance is impossible in tenders as in any business matter. I think that is the bottom line, that all of us understand, that there is no risk negation at all. So there is only risk to a certain extent, risk management and mitigation, especially when it comes to public tenders. Private tenders, there is still a small window of opportunity where we can negotiate and try and avoid certain risks, which may not be the case when it comes to the public tenders. So informed risk, like what Pillai sir said, at the end of the day, what we have to take is informed risk, assess. If you have a cross-functional team, this is going to be a very efficient process, because as long as there is a cross-functional team collaborating with each other, then the assessment of the risks would be much better done.
Yeah, it is here based on the experience of the execution team as well as tendering team, that we should trade off.
Yes.
It's not that I should blindly load up a BOQ and cost, and every cross-functional team plays very safe, everything is loaded, then I will land up in losing the tender itself.
Yes.
So it's very essential to have an experienced team.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, it's important based on that to prepare a very effective bid. Despite being someone who reviews the tender document legally, right, from a legal perspective, any tender document that you find, if I have to sit and start taking deviations, every single tender document will have a minimum of 30 to 50 deviations. That is a bare minimum, right, which is impractical from a business perspective. So have the right team who will, if at all you have to take deviations on a legal clause, must have deviations only.
Yeah.
Let's not go for good to have deviations. It will not go through, especially with public tenders. Private tenders, yes, we do a balancing on the negotiation aspect, right? We take everything once and then we start to let go of the good to have and then push for the must have. But preparing for a public tender, please do keep in mind that when you're preparing the bid, The loading, essential loading only,
Yes.
not
Not
playing
sa-
too
not
safe.
Not safe loading.
Not like very conservative safe loading, a bit of an informed risk. Same with the legal conditions. If at all it is a tender where there can be any deviations taken, essential deviations which are relevant to the business, which will have an impact on your project execution only. There may be from my experience as a lawyer, I always advise that if your scope is clear, we will come to that and we will discuss that in detail. If your scope is clear, if you have absolute clarity on the scope and you're on the same page with your customer, you have a lot of leeway with the legal conditions.
Yes.
If your scope is unclear, you may have the perfectly drafted contract. It is not going to save. So having the right bid prepared with the right cross-functional team is very important for us there. These are some of the best practices. I'm not saying these are the only practices that we can have, right? There are, as situation demands, but across the industries and segments that we have seen, the best practices that we have mentioned, we have found immense success rates for that in simplifying the process, making life easier for everyone involved in the process. Once your bid is successfully submitted, we presume we prepare this, have a team, and we have a successful submission of the bid through the portal or whatever is the process. Next comes the evaluation process, where none of the bidder really does not have much of a say there. But there are a couple of things that we need to be aware of during the bid evaluation process. So there are multiple evaluations, primarily the technical and financial evaluation, because usually bids sometimes happen in a two-stage bidding process. So you would submit your technical bid first. They will evaluate whoever qualified technically. Only those bids will be invited to submit the financial bid. So then the financial bid will be evaluated, and then whoever is the lowest bidder who technically qualifies would be declared as an L1, the lowest bidder. And then that is where it goes.
Yeah.
So technical evaluation is basically on your technical capability and experience and all that based on the documents you have submitted. The financial evaluation, again, is self-explanatory. The pricing, any payment terms, difference in payment terms, like what Pillai sir said, sometimes the customer may not be offering an advance. If we request for an advance, that becomes a consideration for the customer.
Yeah, that will become interest-bearing advance.
Yes.
Or if not interest-bearing, he will lower the interest in your price.
In the price. So there are implications to that. They will also, of course, when they're evaluating a bidder, they will also look at the financial stability, the track record, the project execution track records of the bidders. These are the two primary evaluations.
Actually, wherever possible, wherever the contract permits, better to get in a consortium or joint venture with the local partner. It will give you price preference, price advantage because of local content.
Yes. So India is moving towards something called a preference towards the Make in India requirement, which does not in any manner mean that India does not want to bring in business from other entities. But if it is a locally manufactured and procured this thing, there will be a slight preference. So if at all there is an opportunity where you see you may not qualify by yourself, but you have an appropriate partner with whom jointly you can bid, it would actually give a lot of a leverage.
Sometimes contract itself provides for the consortium with local bidder, local manufacturer.
The qualification criteria by itself would be that either you should have a presence or you should enter into a JV or a consortium with a local partner who qualifies with XYZ criteria. There would be a commercial evaluation to understand whether the bidder understands the requirements of the project or whatever is the product supply, irrespective of even if it is a technical or a IT heavy related projects. The evaluation criteria remain, the process remain pretty much the same. Then, of course, there would be a comparative evaluation.
Comparative evaluation, of course, it will be in, obviously L1 bidder will be the most preferred, or obviously he will be getting the project or supply orders. However, based on the experience, what happens is if the volume is very high, say 1,000 transformers or distribution transformers or turbines or these windmills if the quantities are very high, what happens practically is the customer calls the L1. If once he becomes, then 50% of that is offloaded to them. Then calls the L2 and L3 customers, then asks them to match the L1 price and distributes 25% each to such L2 and L3 customers. These type of things are very much permitted. And though the law, the Central Vigilance Commission guidelines suggest that no negotiation can be done with the L1 bidder, but for certain circumstances or conditions to be recorded in writing, some few exceptions are there. So if they want to expedite they don't want to keep all the eggs in one basket, definitely they will call L2 and L3. Then he will come and match the price and take it. In that process, that volume game, that whatever percentage, it may go off. Right. So these are the practical things which really happens during the evaluation.
Right. Sometimes if the requirement is for 1,000 unit, we have to be prepared that all the 1,000 units may not be awarded irrespective of the fact that we may be an L1. But you would find that in the tender documents. If you review the tender documents, you will know that there is a
clause will be there.
Such a clause would be there. It is not that the tender document will not indicate it. So there are certain regulatory requirements. Also, all these are not done at the whims and fancies of the procurer. It would be these are all regulated procurement guidelines. So if it is a part of a guideline, you would find upfront in the tender document, which is why it is important that we review upfront so that we have a clarity of, okay, the requirement is 4,000, but then how much can we go forward to? That brings us to the post-bid stage. So we were talking about till the evaluation. Once the evaluation is done, the negotiation process becomes relevant if you're participating in a private tender. And if you're participating in a private tender, the recommendation again would be to push as much as possible, try and get as much protections in favor as possible, because that is going to be a negotiated contract. You have a bit more of leeway. The more you do your homework in terms of the contractual documentation, the negotiation process, have a good negotiation team in place, identify your bottom line, the negotiation process goes much smoother.
Yeah.
With public tenders, not so much of negotiation.
Chandana, in private sector tenders, what happens generally?
Yes.
I myself become a competitor to my bid.
Yeah, true.
Which means that sometime out of curiosity, zeal, that over curiosity, whether I am likely to lose the tender, the customers will keep you really in tender hooks. What he does is, he will call the bidder A and tells that, oh, bidder B has already given the X price. Whether you want to match that price. Like that, he will call C. Like that, these type of, unfortunately, these type of things do happen. So in that process, what happens is we ourselves become competitor to our own bid. Then suddenly we drop a price. Then later we may realize that, oh, and unfortunately, I could have got 100K more for this. Like that, it used to be that. And here, there is nothing right or nothing wrong. These are all the type of things situations to which you will be facing, or you will be forced to face in the private tender.
Yeah, right. Which you would not face in a public tender, because the opportunity for a negotiation is almost there. That stage you can almost keep it as whatever happens during the pre-bid meeting stage. Other than that, in a public tender, no discussions. Once the contract is finalized, again, public tenders, they will have a much simpler format, fixed format, that it's more of a procedural signing. With a private tender, depending on how you have negotiated, we need to make sure that everything as part of the negotiation is captured in the contract documentation. And then we move on to the contract execution stage, which is like the next entire phase of this, once the bidding process has reached a logical conclusion, then it's like a restart of an entire new life cycle, the contract.
Then you hand over to the execution team from your side, and from customer side also, execution team will take over.
So we are not dwelling too much into the post-award processes, but there are still things that foreign companies need to keep in mind. Of course, the contract performance, sticking to whatever is your contractual document. So having someone be always aware. Your team, whoever is executing whichever the contract, be it the supply contract, be it a larger project, whichever, somebody familiar with the contractual requirements is important, because you need to keep a tab on your contractual performance as per the contractual specifications. Financial reporting requirements would be there. You have to maintain your transparency.
Yeah, some public tenders do require that you are supposed to maintain the books of accounts open, maintained for 3-4 years. And it should be open for inspection by the
tenderer, customer.
So that requirements are also clearly mentioned in the tender conditions itself.
Right. So as long as we have a clear understanding of the tender conditions, right, the documentations, a lot of these requirements, they don't come up as surprises. Of course, the local rules and regulations, when you deploy labor, the local labor law compliances, wherever there is a construction or anything, the environmental law compliances. Very importantly, the taxation implications and the tax law compliances.
Comparatively, if it is a pure supply contract, comparatively it is easier and
easier.
Compliance with respect to labor laws may not come into picture.
Right.
Only tax, customs clearance, etc. will be there. So only timely completion is the essence. Without it, if it is not there, then you'll end up in paying LD. Whatever margin you envisaged,
right, might go off as LD or a penalty.
Eaten away in the name of LD.
Yes. Then, of course, quality control, very self-explanatory, right? So, what do you say? The quality norms as agreed as per the contract has to be maintained throughout the life cycle for two reasons: whether for the smooth functioning of your contract life cycle also, but that is self-explanatory, not something that as a specific insight. That sort of that closes the cycle of a bidding cycle. We also wanted to put across to you some of the challenges and pitfalls that we have sort of come across over and over and over again. Yes. And these are not once or twice or thrice. These are just recurrent issues that we constantly have seen. So we have two categories here, right? Some of these are challenges for foreign entities participating. The other are pitfalls. Pitfalls typically apply, I feel, for every bidder.
Yeah.
Irrespective of whether you're a foreign entity or an Indian entity participating in a bid.
You have to live with that.
Yes, we just have to.
Or provide for that.
Yes. So the first challenge that we usually find for a foreign entity is navigating the legal framework because of the legal system. As long as a company coming from a common law country would find it a bit more familiar, if not easier, in India, because the legal structure, the skeletal system remains fairly uniform. But especially entities coming from Europe, which is a civil law jurisdiction, you will have some adjustments to have in the Indian legal framework. The way the procurements are sorted, the way the contractual law is structured here, and the execution, this thing. The format adherence, again, that is actually, if I may say, that is a pitfall more so than a challenge, because it is that is one area where negligence is the sole cause of a bidder being a defaulter. Let's put it as simple as that. Because the problem is, once you do not have a strict adhered format, the next thing you would see is yourself categorized as a defaulter in the GEM portal. So that strict adherence is very important. Cultural differences, of course, there are cultural differences when you come from another part of the geography, right?
Yeah.
And then having a local support here, anybody to support here would be immensely helpful to navigate those cultural differences. Now, it won't be that enormous given the, be it the public procurement or the otherwise, given, the economy and the market exposure in India currently. But there are small nuances which, if you have a local person joining you, that would make an immense difference for you. The third is understanding the competition and local preferences. Very important. One is to understand your competition, of course, Two is also to understand the regulatory framework where there are sometimes local preferences. Like we have something called micro, medium, and small enterprises, MSMEs, right, and specific protections for them. So if an MSME is bidding in certain tenders, they may have a small preference coming up. So opportunity to again join together with an MSME and submitting a bid is a option that we can venture upon. Two is, once you understand that if this is a bid where either an existing PSU or a government entity is a competitor, or an MSME is a bidder, you can align your prices accordingly, your bid strategy accordingly. So these are a few challenges that we find.
Yes.
Which brings us to the largest of the pitfalls we always come across, and it has never changed over the years and over decades.
Across the globe, this will be the biggest.
Across the globe, and I don't think it's an India-specific thing, is failure to assess the scope appropriately. This could make or break the project, and if I may be so bold to say so, it could make or break the entity, sometimes depending on the size of the tender that we participate in. A miss in the scope assessment could bankrupt an entity. So it is very important.
Chandana, sometime I have come across many organizations or customers where it was originally an item rate contract.
Right.
They will give you the BOQ. You have to simply fill up the rate.
Right.
You are supposed to deliver or execute and then get paid. Customers have made it item rate contract into turnkey contract.
Okay.
He said, this is the general condition. This is the special conditions. You see, when I have every right to make all sort of demands. So 2-3 times what happened, we couldn't complete the project. In fact, 20%, 30% net loss, something like that, not as one. If you once you having taken the project, if you're not executing it, unfortunately, I'll be blacklisted.
Right.
I'll not be allowed to participate in any other public procurement, which I can ill afford.
Right.
So whether having taken, even if it is at loss, then I have to execute it. So this is the biggest scope of conflict, raises disputes, make or break is done only here. So
get your scope
clear,
assessed and clear. As I said, despite being a legal person, when I get a contract, I ask first, have you clarified the scope? Because there is no point in as any legal team reviewing the terms and conditions without your scope being clarified appropriately. So please,
well drafted, documented contract legally will not come to the rescue if the scope is not clearly understood by the bidder.
And when we say scope, we are not just talking about large projects, right? We are talking about smallest of the supplies. Be very clear.
What is the warranty period?
What is the warranty period? Is there a defect liability period? Is there an extended warranty period? Once the part is replaced, or any, if you provide a re-performance of service, does the warranty period restart from there?
From there, yes.
So these all come under the scope assessments.
If the products are phased out, then are we providing 4 years warranty spares?
Spares.
The contract provides for.
Upgrades, updates, all these. So please make sure we have those in line. Bidding partners, as we mentioned in multiple scenarios, having the right bidding partners wherever a bidding partner is necessary, is very important. Tax implications.
Tax implications basically for foreign companies, it is basically a permanent establishment. See, if the normal practice is, if the scope is big, if the turnkey execution type, normally your parent will take care of the supplies on a FOB basis, and then you being in India, you may have to take care of the erection, testing, commissioning, so including the custom clearance from the port. So this will avoid the tax implication. This will avoid the permanent establishment issue for your parent company. That is, it will save the tax on the supply portion. Otherwise, what happens is, once the permanent establishment is established in India for the parent company, unfortunately, part of the trading profit will be taxed in India. This is one of the biggest challenge for any foreign company to submit the execute the project here. So this we have to be very careful. There is very thin, very wafer thin line whether if something can be get into PE or not PE.
Right.
So that is the biggest challenge. We have to be very much mindful of these facts, engage the right avenues.
Right. And the last of these is not doing a risk assessment and having the right mitigation measures. As simple as having the right insurance policies in place, having the right protections, having the right warranty terms in place could mean. So see, risk mitigation could be multiple, right? Some of the risks you pass it down. If you have sub-suppliers, subcontractors, make sure that the risks are passed down. Make sure that your subcontractors are able to bear the risk to the extent if not have sufficient insurance policies in place. For all this, you need to have your team. So the bottom line, what we are trying to say is when you get a tender, right? Technical qualifications and price. Do not just look at only those two unless and until it's like a basic tender query.
Correct.
And then, you can just look at the price alone. Which concludes most of our, the topic related things. Again, I would like to just take a moment to mention about the guidance that SAS Partners offers throughout the bidding cycle in this, right? Starting from the bid qualification process. So see, whether a bidder qualifies or not is in the bidder's hand, but the criteria evaluation is something that we can assess and tell you where it comes to the non-technical criteria. Technical criteria, of course, the bidder, as per your technology, whatever your technical expertise are. But sometimes, like what Pillai sir said, there is a technical collaboration requirement. There will be a requirement specifically to have a particular type of consortium. There will be a requirement to have a specific project execution partner and all these. So non-technical bid qualification criteria, providing guidance and clarifying is something that SAS Partners would be glad to provide to our clients, and something that we have the capability to provide in-house. Yes. Within the bid qualification criteria comes the compliance, where you are required to have, a presence in India. SAS Partners, right from incorporation onwards of an entity, if you're required to have an entity presence in India, a comprehensive advisory and assistance in setting up a presence, starting up operations, identifying all that. So an end-to-end support can be provided, where you're not required to have a presence, but you're required to have a suitable bidding partner in India. Identifying a bidding partner is something that SAS can help, clients with. Once we clear the qualification criteria, the tender documentation review, of course, the entire tender documentation review from the tax, legal perspective, commercial perspective, doing a review and providing relevant inputs based on the business, right? And not just highlighting possible risks, but so the review process is after understanding the business of the client and the requirement. So the detailed review of tender documents and providing inputs on that can be provided. Pre-bid meetings where the customers allow. One is working with the team or with the client's team in preparing the queries or the questionnaires that Pillai sir mentioned about the key commercial tax, legal risks, preparing the questionnaires during the for the pre-bid meeting. And if the customer allows and there is a risk or the areas of risk where we need clarifications, where advisors from SAS have to be present, we can even join the team to attend the pre-bid meetings. Once the pre-bid meetings are over, based on that, there can be support in terms of bid preparation, in terms of interpreting the bid documentation, advising on how the bid documentation submission could go on, guidance, like what Pillai sir said, guidance on price bid preparation to avoid unusual loadings into the prices, supporting and finalizing the commercial terms and conditions to ensure that we don't take up unwanted deviations, and even with respect to commercial TNCs, we take a balanced approach towards that. Wherever required, if there is a requirement for a JV to be formed, then drafting of a JV agreement or a consortium agreement, any other related contracts or cooperation agreements or any of those kind of documentations, drafting, vetting, these are areas where SAS Partners can support the clients. This is still the bid preparation. Bid submission, of course, is in the client's hands. As long as once all this is done and the documents are collated appropriately and bid is submitted, once the award of contract comes, where it is a private tender, of course, we can look at the tender terms, award of contract terms and conditions of the contract to see whether it is in line with the negotiations. And then post award stages, wherever there are issues coming up with respect to taxations or commercial, legal, the advisory support. So during a bid life cycle, starting from bid qualification, I think during till the award and the project execution stage, the contract execution stage, all key stages, there are capabilities within SAS Partners to provide constant support through this, which we hope will make things easier for our clients, simplify the process and sort of, guide and encourage our clients to participate more into the whole bidding process. Yeah. So that sort of brings us to the end of our cycle. And in conclusion, what we would like to actually say is, see, Indian tendering process, the documentations are multiple, yes. It requires planning, it requires active involvement from the participants, but it is with a bit of local expertise and the right team at your end and the right commitment, it is a process that can be very effectively and efficiently navigated for foreign bidders. There is a huge market, like what Pillai sir said.
It's about 1/5 of $3.7 billion is purchased through this public procurement system.
Just the public procurement system. And we are not even considering the private tenders.
$740 billion.
So it is absolutely a space that can be navigated and participated. We really hope this session was useful for all of you. We have been able to throw some light into at least a bird's eye view of what the Indian tendering system is. And I hand it over to
Rupal for opening the Q&A session. Yeah, Rupal?
Yes. Am I audible?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much, Pillai sir and Chandana, for this engaging session. It was quite engaging. I did have a few attendees leave me a message saying, nice sessions, when can we start the Q&A? So we now welcome the question answer session for the attendees. In fact, we already have a few lined up in our Q&A box. I'm just going to read out a few questions from that. And I would appreciate if Mr. Pillai and Ms. Chandana could take a few minutes to quickly answer them. And for the rest, attendees, if you wish to still ask a question, please raise your hand and I will unmute you to ask the question. To start off with, in the question box, we have our first question. Where can we find private sector tenders? Are there any specific portals like in CPP and GEM for public sector?
I'm not 100% sure whether there is a portal exclusively for private sector tenders. However, please do check out Tender 24/7. There is a portal called Tender 24/7 where I did find a lot of tenders, global tenders, Indian tenders. So that is across the segment. So I'm guessing you might be able to find some private, at least the major inquiries. One of the reasons you may not find it like that is because private sector tenders are not open tenders usually. So they are limited tenders. So typically private sector tenders might go out to specific 5 or 6 people that they invite tenders from. Very limited scenarios where a private entity will go for an open tender like what a public procurement would be. So that could be one of the challenge where you may not find one.
Thank you. Just moving to the next question. Can you please elaborate on the difference between EOIs and tender?
See, EOI or an expression of interest. I'm presuming you meant an expression of interest and a tender. Tender is more of a, more structured.
From the customer
side. That is in the legal terms, if I may put it across, a tender is an invitation to offer. Both are non-binding, if you ask me, right? An expression of interest is more in terms of, what do you say, that is also an informal level of inquiry that comes in terms of
like a beginning of the tender process.
Beginning of a tender process, more of an informal inquiry where there is an expression of interest that comes up.
Maybe the customer would like to build upon the tender based on the
responses to get from the EOIs. And then the tender starts from, it is a more formalized process,
yes,
the EOIs, which is more regulated as per the norms.
All right. The next question is, in the reverse bidding process, do parties get to discover other bidders and their quoted price and proposal document?
No, you wouldn't be able to see their whose price it is and what is their proposal document. You would only be able to see what is the lowest bid at that current point of time.
Who has quoted cannot be seen.
Yeah, there would be confidentiality reasons, right?
Purpose will be defeated.
Yeah, so purpose will be defeated. So.
Right. All right. The next question: if the tender is cancelled by the buyer midway, how does one cover oneself?
Yeah, in fact, this what happens in the tender document itself. There used to be a clause that due to various reasons, the tenderer, that is the prospective customer, is entitled to cancel the tender. But for that, unfortunately, the cost of preparation of the tender, nothing will be reimbursed.
There is very less recourse, unfortunately, at this point of time. It depends on the nature.
Only after the award, and if during the midway, if it is cancelled by the customer, then some cost plus something will be agreed upon.
Once we have a contract formed,
yes,
then we have rights kicking in, right? Till the contract is formed, you're still in the yet to form the contract stage.
It's still in the proposal stage. Marriage has not taken place.
Yeah. So
this is something in regards to the risks that you mentioned.
Yes. Yeah, that is one of the reasons why we said that it is important to have the documents submitted appropriately, because if something leads to a a retendering, the brunt is borne by all participants.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So I'm moving on to the next question. If there is a sudden change in government law with retrospective effect as it was seen in telecom sector, how do we cover such risks?
See, typically under the contract, the terms and conditions, we look for something called a change in law clause. So if there is a change of law, then a lot of government documents are drafted fairly. So you might find some protection, but it all depends on whether you have a change in law clause in your contract or not. So if there is a change in law clause and there are price implications coming in on account of the change in law, if the contractual protection is there, then we can claim under that.
Yes, there's a change in law. Today you are submitting the bid. The law which are in force in the country, that based on those law only you are expected to take into account and submit the bid. If something changes at a later date suddenly with retrospective effect, then you cannot be party to it. Then you will be suitably.
You will have a recourse under the contract typically. Again, with private customers, important to have the change in law clause. Typically, for most part of it, I do see change in law clause in the public sector contracts for most part of it.
Yeah, next one is the scope for covering yourself for foreign exchange fluctuation. If you see, typically, let me take this question. There is some, if the short, again, we'll split into short duration contract and longer duration contract. As a tenderer, as a bidder, you are expected to build up the hedge. You have to take a hedge for the total outflow, what is expected to be. Your finance team will be able to help you. This hedging cost, they call it as 0.5% or 1%, depending upon the volume of the dollar involved. You have to go for the hedging cost. But I have not come across currency fluctuation being paid by the customer. Okay. I have not come across. If it is a longer duration project or shorter duration project, of course, anything can happen. Suddenly, any dollar can go to any extent. But it is not reimbursed by any customer or tenderer. It is in our interest to take a hedge. The hedging should cover this risk.
Can we go to the last question here?
Sure.
Are there any laws which protect bidders from not getting timely payments, specifically which are milestone-based RFQ?
See, payment terms, two aspects. One is primarily contractually governed. What are your payment terms agreed in the contract? So what are your rights under the contract? Right. So those are the things that we have to look at. If contractually we have agreed to an interest rate or something, then yes. Otherwise, if you're an MSME entity, an MSME entity is by law protected that they have to be paid within 45 days. Otherwise, law prescribes a percentage of interest for delayed payment. The other side, unfortunately, we won't have too much of rights unless and until we incorporate rights into the contract. One of the right that we can look at is sort of suspend our performance of contracts, saying that till I get the payment, I cannot perform. But that, although legally, technically, that is a right, when it gets challenged, there is a slight wiggle ground there, because you have to prove that without that cash flow, you're not able to perform the contract. Only then can we do that. If you have enough cash flow that you could have performed that,
Yes.
then the suspension right may not hold.
Yeah, unfortunately, in India, though the customer agrees that within 30 days or whatever stipulated period, it will be paid. But unfortunately, it's not adhered to by customer. Only for that, if you are a monopoly type, you can go for LC.
Yeah.
You can ask the customer to open the letter of credit. Otherwise, yes, these type of clauses, what happens is it may protect you in the event of they levying LD, provided you keep recording during the execution stage that you are delayed this payment, I could not make this is because of this chain of reaction.
Right.
Keep the documentation, apply for the time extension, waiver of LD, all those things.
Unfortunately, under Indian law, for non-payment by itself, we do not have a termination right. But then from a business perspective, termination is not what you're looking for also, right? When you're doing a project, you're looking for executing the project. If we need timely payments, we have to build it into the contractual conditions. With private customers, especially, yes, please do build it in. We build a much stronger suspension right. We do not leave it to the law to take care of it. We build in a much stronger suspension right. We even build in a termination right there with termination and cancellation charges. In a negotiated contract, we can build in clauses. With public utilities and public tenders, we have limited rights, but the payment terms are fairly okay with respect to
but
the
problem terms are okay,
delay.
but practically it is not adhered.
Yeah, adhered.
That is a challenge.
LC again with the
LC, provided you are in a commanding position with respect to your product.
It is unfortunately a reality. There's no sugarcoating it at all in the Indian scenario. Unfortunately, a reality for us that when they do not insist, especially for public tenders, if there is a delay in payment, we just have to persist unless and until the contractual term. We can, of course, look at the contractual terms and see if we can use the suspension right to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But beyond that, at this point, would be difficult.
Thank you. The floor is still open for any more Q&As. If there's anybody from our attendees who wish to speak and ask a question, kindly raise your hand with the icon, and I would be able to unmute you to ask your question directly to the speakers. Or as mentioned, you can even leave a message on the Q&A box for us to have the question answered. We would take another 5 minutes in case any more question and answers need to be conveyed over here with our speakers. Okay. So I think we have no more questions. I think Mr. Pillai and Ms. Chandana have covered the session so interestingly well that the questions were answered, and I think we've covered most of the important points. Do any of the attendees wish to ask any question to our speakers? So I think we could probably look at closing up. And let me, Pillai sir, do you have anything you would like to conclude on?
Yeah. Say, thanks a lot for all participants, and really it has given us a good opportunity to reach out to all such a good, wonderful audiences. And as shown in the last slide, we would be happy to join you in your journey towards participating in any tender and successful getting of the tender from public or private. We'll be able to help you for the total process. And this may be the web series. It's series 1, and we continue to have similar series in the forthcoming days. We thank you one and all. Of course, as I told in the beginning, such a big market, you can ill afford not to participate. So we wish that you participate in the tender, of course, with the complete backup in all respect. And wish you all the success, and thank you one and all for the participation and encouraging us to have the next session as well.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for joining in and having the patience to sit through this afternoon, in an afternoon time. So thanks everyone. Any other questions, feel free to share with our organizing team. We'd be glad to look at it.
On behalf of SAS, I would like to take a moment to thank our expert speakers for sharing this knowledge and insights, and all the attendees who showed their interest in participation and the thoughtful questions that came forward on this topic. Lastly, I would like to thank SAS Partners for organizing this informative webinar on such an important topic. So I hope this session has helped our attendees demystify the Indian tendering landscape. Looking forward to hosting you all again in the future sessions. SAS Partners will be coming forward with a lot more informative and knowledgeable sessions of this sort. Thank you once again. Thank you, Mr. Pillai. Thank you, Ms. Chandana. And have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.